It's been an amazing couple of days for me here, and there's a lot going through my mind. I actually genuinely don't know what the hell I'm going to say to you now. Yesterday afternoon, the panel talked a lot about issues, gender diversity, inclusion, and I made the comment then that we've got to try, if we can, to remind ourselves that particularly people like us in this room have a particular insight, a particular passion that, in a way, we want for the rest of our society, our economy, our community. And what really then leads me to, I guess, consider is how challenging it is. You know, we've got so many different groups with different areas of passion, you know, whether it's innovation or sustainability or diversity, inclusion, the international competitiveness. There's a whole range of agendas. And invariably, when you go down the path of talking to those people who are passionate, we land on this thing called leadership. What is it? Why do we need it? What's wrong with what we have? And for me, my journey has sort of led me to believe that we have a major gap between our notion of our roles as leaders and leadership across our economy and what we really need if we're going to accomplish the aspirations that many of us have in whatever field or domain we have. And certainly when you think of the wonderful things that have been presented to us, there's so many exciting opportunities that it's really this notion of closing the leadership gap that I want to talk about. Our economy is fundamentally different now. Now, there are a number of consequences of the connected nature of things. Just to touch on a few, human value is where humans and the value that humans create is where economic value is today. 30 years ago, you couldn't say that. 30 years ago, listed companies' value was defined by the physical and the financial value on the balance sheet. 80% correlation. Today, that 80% is down at 30%. When you're buying shares in companies, you're buying the future. You're buying a belief in the people, the relationships, the knowledge, and the potential for that organisation to continue to create value. Very, very different. The second is that your organisation is no longer your org chart. The org chart is a representation only of management hierarchy. It is not your organisation. Your organisation is a social network. The extent to which it's connected and wired and active as a network, both internally and externally to the organisation, is a function of leadership, it's a function of intent, it's a function of how the people in the organisation feel, their level of passion, their level of engagement, the level to which they're connected. And finally, and most importantly, is potential. And if you talk about the kind of leadership we need, I think it really starts with recognising and being obsessive about reaping the potential in people, all our people. 30 years ago when I started work, my sources of knowledge were Dad, Encyclopedia Britannica, my boss and people close to me at work, and maybe what I remembered of my education. Today, a 25-year-old has access to enormous knowledge of all sources thanks to the connectivity of the internet. And I know we poo-poo sometimes the quality of information out there, but the truth is there are wonderful, credible sources of knowledge available to us by virtue of being connected. So if you say 30 years ago a human being had a unit of one access to knowledge and information, today you pick, you take your number. Is it 10 times, 5 times? I don't care, it's a lot more. Similarly, connection. 30 years ago, I talked to maybe 10 people a day at work, usually physically close by or a local call. International calls were expensive, and international communications was almost non-existent. It was, you go down to the telex room and you shoot off a message through the operator and hope you get something back 3 or 4 days later. Today, we're communicating with hundreds of people anywhere based on what it is we happen to be interested in. My view of human potential and value is it's a multiplication of what you know and who you're connected to. If you know a lot, but you're not connected to anyone, you're probably not adding value. If you know nothing and you're connected to a lot of people, you're probably not adding a lot of value. Your value, the potential of people, is a combination of what they know and who they're connected to, and I don't care what numbers you put on now versus 10, 20, 30 years ago, the potential of people and therefore the potential of organisations is significantly greater than ever before. And that's the opportunity we have as leaders, as people within organisations, is to see the potential in others and to reap it. But to do that, we move to the second aspect of all of this, is first recognise that potential, but the second is, and it really comes down to a challenge we have, is I don't think we do enough in the area of defining what success is. Like, what is success? You can't say success is achieving any one particular agenda. Success is a holistic thing, and I believe that leaders in organisations now have to be obsessive about their role in defining success and aligning their people with that success. Now, I don't say coming up with it on their own. Involving their people, involving others, being open to ideas, but defining success and aligning their people with success. Now, I want to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask the fellows if you can get out your mobile phones. I'm going to ask you a question about what success means to you. Now, come on, I need you to grab your devices because we're going to do a little bit of a survey here. So if they guys could bring that up. There's 5 choices here in terms of, and just pick the one that is most you. I know that some of these you'll say, you know, there's a couple of these things that are equal. You just got to pick the one that is the most important to you or the one that most represents you. So success at work, what does it mean to you? Is it having a lot of money, having great personal relationships at work, doing what you love doing, making a contribution to society, the community, the environment, creating something new or special? We'll just run that up and see what happens. There you go. So 36% doing what you love. All right, now we're going to run this again, but this time we're going to run it. And these 5 attributes are quite similar in the way that they're couched, but this time I'm going to ask you about your organisation's view of success, the organisation you work for. What is its view of success? So is it about making a lot of money? Is it about having great business relationships with customers and suppliers? Creating a workplace with purpose and passion? Making a contribution or creating something new or special? So this is about the organisation that you work for. What does success mean? So we're going to get a sense here. Okay. So it's interesting. There's a little bit of alignment down there on the second last one, but other than that, it's pretty well shifted to the economics. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? That and maybe when we go back to what Charles was talking about, this misalignment between people at work and passion for what they do, this could be the source of it. Although I know this is a pretty unusual group in that I think most of you find a way to fuel your passion in what you're doing, regardless of perhaps a little bit of that misalignment. For me, my view of leadership changed by virtue of being thrown into a circumstance that was very, very different to anything I'd experienced before. There's a wonderful report in the UK that came out of the UK in 2009 called Engaging for Success. And essentially what it said that was that leaders who led their organisations with very high engagement became that way because they went through an experience that gave them an insight that they hadn't had previously. In other words, there was an aha moment about their leadership experience. And for me, it was when I was CEO of 9MSN, the online business, which was a joint venture between Microsoft and PBL, as a startup, and it was 1998, the internet was new, there was no online advertising market, and I went into this organisation with a brief from the shareholders to make it profitable in 3 to 5 years. That was what I was told. We had 10 business plans, lots of aspirations, 100 smart people that came from media, telecommunications, technology backgrounds. We had lots of money to spend. We had Brands Australia new through the ACP magazines and Channel 9 television programs because we became the internet extension of all of those. And I went into that company as a CEO, and I arrived there with the least domain expertise of anybody in the organisation. In other words, I came out of tech sales. I knew nothing about advertising, which was our core revenue stream, and I knew nothing about media, which was our core product. And going in there as a CEO with least domain knowledge meant that every meeting I went to with staff, I was the person in the room who knew least. And I have to say, it was a very uncomfortable experience, having gone from leadership because of my domain expertise in the IT sales and marketing field into an organisation where I had no domain expertise. So all I could do when I went into meetings was sit there and ask questions. And it was uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable, but that's all I could do. I just sat there, I listened to what people had to say, I was forced to do that. I distilled the issues that we faced, the challenges that people expressed, tried to make it into a clear set of things we'd have to do to fix it, and then I used my authority just to clear the way. And for a number of years, I led that way, where my focus was helping other people, enabling them, listening to them, learning from them, and using my authority to get obstacles out of their way. About 4 years into the journey, I was sitting in my office, and it was a really tough few years on the way there. But I was sitting in my office looking at the wall, and I realised I had nothing to do. And I realised that having no domain expertise was a blessing. That I was forced by virtue of not knowing anything to shift from being the kind of control-oriented know-it-all to being someone who just listened, learnt, and supported people around me. And it was it was like the light went on for me. It said, my role is not the star player. My role is to coach and help. You know, my role is not here to control these people. My role is to be here to help these people. And it was a profound change to the way that I then moved on to lead other organisations. The other one in terms of success that sort of made me want to focus a little bit on this today was the early iterations of the 9MSN homepage were terrible. I had directors ringing up saying, the response times are bad, the site's not working particularly well. Even though the homepage itself looked pretty. It was designed by a fellow called Chris, and it was a really nice homepage. It looked good. The problem was the technology guys hated it because it was unreliable, hard to support, and the way it was structured meant that response times would always be a challenge. It was too heavy, too overweight. The sales guys hated it because the advertising opportunities on the page were not what they wanted and not sufficient, in their view, to inspire advertisers. Editorial hated it because the layout of the content, the editorial content on the page was not what they wanted, not what they felt was going to be compelling for users. The marketing team didn't like it because the branding and navigation didn't meet their expectations. And then finance didn't like it because we were losing $3 million a month, and they figured if we're going to sell something, it was going to be the homepage. So it just struck me at that point that, wow, this is an issue we've got to resolve. So I sat down with Chris and I said, Chris, I need you to change the homepage. I need you to sit down with each of the functions of the business, and come up with a specification that meets the overall company's needs and build a page that does that. And Chris just looked at me and he said, Steve, I didn't come here to do corporate shit. I came here to do cool design. And I said, Chris, there's no option here. We need to build something that supports, the overall objectives of the company. He said, well, that's not me. And we agreed at that point to part ways. And we did amicably. Because he realised that what the company needed and where it was going was not for him. And it was there where I started to realise that making these expectations clear to people was important to engaging them and engaging their passion. So what I then realised, because the company was so new, was that as a CEO and my head of marketing, we had to actually do the work. That we had to be responsible for trying to define success for each of the functions. Because remember, if it was built for the tech function, it would have been the most bland and basic homepage you've ever seen. It'd do nothing. If it was built for sales, it'd be one big frickin' ad. If it was built for content, it would be all editorial. If it was built for marketing, it would all be navigation and branding. And so the point was that we had to make clear to each function of the company that what was right for the company was a sub-optimization of what was right for them. In other words, we had to redefine success. Because what happens is if you don't actively connect the individual and the function with the big picture and what success looks like, you get people making judgments of their own, which suit their own purposes, but really detract from the overall. So in other words, the way that we look at things functionally is not just for my function, but for what delivers to the broader good of the organisation that I'm working for. And it was through those experiences that I realised that this whole notion of enlightened leadership is really the recognition that there is no greater purpose for organisational leaders than being focused on their people, being focused on the very challenging work of defining success and making that, defining it with the people you're working with, defining it with your stakeholders in mind, but really working actively to define it and then aligning every person in the organisation with what it is that that success implies and inspires in the roles that they conduct. And it's my very strong view that whether you're talking about an individual view, a functional view, an organisational view, or a national view, the big gap and the big challenge we have today is our notion of leadership is not consistent with what I've said. There should be a lot more focus on what does success look like for Australia. You know, you just by tackling gender equity or, inclusion or innovation, we're breaking this whole question apart. We've got to start with the big picture. What is success for Australia? And then how do we contribute to that? What are the characteristics and the attributes? And ultimately, it comes down to what are the mindsets that we're going to proliferate. And I believe that if we're really serious about accelerating Australia's path on the journey to being what it is I know in each of your heads you want it to be, the question of leadership, the question of what success looks like, and the investment in proliferating it is something that should get enormous focus at all levels of our society and community, and it's one that we're going to have to invest a hell of a lot if we want to shift inertia or the current rate of change, which in my view isn't fast enough given the wonderful opportunities we face. Thank you very much.